Welcome everybody. I think we'll make a start. So firstly, housekeeping. We've got nobody online today. The housekeeping, the safety procedures for foreign emergency and health and safety are noted on the screens in front of you. And I don't think I need to read those, do I, Hannah? Excellent. So we've got that out of the way. I'd like to start with our Deputy Mayor and a karakia to start the meeting. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr Chair. O te rā tēnā tātou, te kaunihira, ngā kaimahi, koutou I konei, tēnā anō hoki koutou. We'll start with the karakia tūtawa, one that is talks about decisions being made, getting energy from each other, working as collaboratively as we can, and making the best decisions we can as well. Tūtawa mai I runga, tūtawa mai I raro, tūtawa mai I roto, tūtawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tā iki e. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So moving to the agenda, we have no apologies today. I'm unaware of any additional items. Are there any declarations of interest? And I don't believe we have any public comment today. So the minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated, and I'm happy to move those minutes for approval and looking for a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Naylor, sorry. Are there any comments on the minutes? No? Then I think we can move forward. Today on the agenda, we'll vote on the minutes, apologies. I do this so infrequently. All in favour? Electronically, yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay. Okay. Fabulous. All in favour? Carried. So then moving to the agenda for today, I note that we have Debbie Pereira here and in the audience and waiting for the adoption of the annual report, which is agenda item 9. So I think we could actually move that forward on our agenda today and deal with that straight away. So I'd suggest if Scott's available, and Debbie, welcome, and we're in your hands.
Good morning, Chair and fellow elected members. It's really nice to have this here at this point. The team behind in the gallery and Debbie's audit team have worked really hard to get us to this point. You'll see that there has been a separate cover issued with a few changes since the timing of the print run for the agenda versus some final tweaks back from the audit team. The changes within that cover are all disclosure related, wording, formatting kind of changes. There's no substantive changes through the document at that point. So as we brought to Council through the September Council meeting, we brought the fourth quarter report. There haven't been many changes from that point. So again, a really good capital spend for the organisation of 75.9 million our best ever on record. That has remained unchanged. There has been a slight change in the number of non-financial performance measures met. That's reduced by 1 from 52 to 51 as a result of some work through the audit teams and confirmation from a consultant around a water measure. Again, it has been a very strong performance for the organisation. We've got lower debt than planned. We have a net operating position of 0.2 million favourable. We do have a larger operating surplus as a result of development contributions and sales of Tamakuku Terrace properties. I will take most of the documents largely as read. I know there are a lot of pages there, and happy to take some questions at the end, but I will pass over to Debbie, our Audit Director, to talk about the audit opinion.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here in this position. There's a lot of work, as Scott has said, that gets to this point by both council and audit, and it is a very large document, but it is important because it does report back against your performance, against your annual plan and your long-term plan, so it's part of your accountability. I also just want to note that there are no unadjusted errors that we've got holding on what we call we have a statement schedule, and everything has been adjusted, so we appreciate the assistance that we have had with council staff to get to this point. So I've got the audit opinion here. So the opinion's of two halves. It is, first of all, over the financial statements, and I'm pleased to say that it's an unqualified opinion over the financial statements, which means that we're satisfied that the finances reflect the actual position of council. And then a modified opinion over the statement of financial performance. There's 3 measures, so 2 of them are measures that you've had in the past, around complaints, around the resolution times, and the last one is around road condition, the smooth travel exposure. So the issue that we've just got there is that a survey hasn't been done in the last 3 years, so this will be the 3rd annual report reporting back against the same measure. So yeah, so apart from that, you know, we're really appreciative of the relationship that we have and the work that we've had. We're also confident that the issues that we've raised here are being dealt with, and that council does have processes in place now to deal with that. Yeah. But I'm happy to take any questions that anyone
Thank
might
you.
have.
Thank you, Debbie. And councillors, just in terms of process around this particular paper, I note that the CE has delegated authority to address minor edits, corrections, and I would suggest that we could feed those through to the CE separately and focus on the substantive issues that arise during questions and commentary. And in terms of questions, I might kick off. Thank you, Debbie. Firstly, can you just update exactly where we are in the process in terms of completion?
Yeah, sure. So we've completed our audit work, and again, it's kind of 2 halves with the audit as well. There's the underlying information that we have to audit, but then there's the actual document itself. So that has gone through review right up, I suppose, to the last minute. Yesterday there was still some changes coming through, but the document that you've got in front of you is the document that council will be adopting.
So just for clarification, the annual report,
Yes.
there are a great swathe of numbers recast, repeated, which are obviously drawn from the financial statements, but you and your team have gone through and independently verified
Yes,
that they're internally consistent.
that's
Thank
correct,
you.
yes.
Great, excellent. Just then, in terms of your audit, were there any particular critical matters or issues that you identified pre-audit that you were placing particular emphasis on during the audit? And if there were, what were they and what did you find?
Yeah, sure. So the revaluation of roading assets this year was an area of focus that we had, in particular because it's made up of a lot of assumptions. There's the quantity of the roads, there's the unit price input. So that was an area that we've always identified as being a risky area, just because it does have the potential to have big numbers that flow into the annual report. It also has a flow on into the depreciation numbers that will hit in the future years. So that was an area, and we are satisfied around that. We also had the performance measures as a significant risk or significant area of focus. And apart from the three that I've identified, which going into it, we knew about the first two, about the complaints and about the resolution times, but the rest of them are all well. There was a change in accounting standard this year, which is IFRS 48, which is around the performance measures. And you'll see in the annual report, I think it's probably near the front of it, but starting from page 28, there's a lot more disclosure required this year. And you have to report against key areas of key assumptions and just a lot more background. So there was a little bit more work around that we did. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So then, in terms of areas in these financial statements and matters on the balance sheet which require judgment on behalf of management, what sort of review around that judgment? Were there any areas, perhaps you could set out what you think are the major matters of judgment?
Yeah.
Was there any discussion or debate with management? Were there different points of view that had to be resolved? Can you just provide some flavour around those judgments?
Yeah, so, judgments are usually around provisions and accruals. So there's, we had discussions around a number of things, but there was no debates or anything, or no unresolved issues that we had around those. But as auditors, we do look at areas where there's potential for management override, and we address that risk by looking at journals, we will select the risk where we do a review, and we have the sort of riskier journals that we identify based on a number of criteria, and we specifically look at those. We look at inputs into anywhere that there could be some management bias, such as discount rates, if there's a provision, that type of thing. But we didn't have any concerns around, around any of the things that we saw.
Okay, thank you. And then we haven't seen a management letter for this year, but I expect, given where you are with the audit, you've got some clarity around what key issues you would be reporting back.
Yeah.
Could you perhaps give us some indication of what those matters that you've uncovered would be?
Yeah, so probably the biggest things that we'll be reporting back is against the performance measures, and in particular the new one, which is around the road smoothness. I think there's a couple of things around payroll and and approvals, and we always look at the leave balances. But there's not a lot of new issues raised this year compared to the previous year, and things have also been resolved from last year.
Okay. And then finally from me, just in relation to these financial statements, I'm used to seeing representation letters which are signed by the governance body or by members of the governance body on behalf of the governance body, which are regularly backed up with representation letters from the management team. And I'm expecting that process is in place here. And my question is, around those representation letters, have there been any changes in what's proposed this year from last year? are there any matters that we should know about in respect to those representation
Yeah,
matters?
no, there's no change from last year. The, probably the only changes will be around any unrecorded errors, unadjusted errors, but there is none to put on for this year, so there's no changes to the representation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Scott. Debbie. It's just a question about how the key achievements are extracted from all the things that have been achieved. So, for example, on page 117, we've got 3 key achievements in connected communities and safe communities. I have to say they wouldn't be my 3 key achievements. So I'm just wondering what the process is for determining which key achievements are extracted from the narrative to put in the box.
Sorry, I'm just having trouble tracking what page you're on.
Well, it's page 16 of the summary, I think, attachment 2. So it's item 9, attachment 2, and it's page 117 of our agenda. So it's under goal 3, a connected and safe community. You've got the header picture.
Yep.
And then you've got 2 or 3 pages of all the things that have been achieved. And then we've picked out 3. And I'm interested to know, before I comment on it later, what the process was in picking out those 3, first of all. Or how it is that those are the 3 that have been determined to be the key achievements.
I believe that would be a management decision about what are the key achievements out of that group of activities. As you can imagine, the goals cover a wide variety of items, and it is tough to pick just 3 to fit in into a summary document for that.
Okay, well on page 121 in contrast, we've got 5 key achievements for environment.
I'm not certain there's any method or reasoning for the number under each goal.
Okay. If elected members had a view about what the key achievements were, would that be a minor amendment?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I will, as directed by the chair, send an email to the CE, is it? With my opinion on what the key achievements are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Excuse me. I'm just looking at the financial summary. I think it's page, well, there's a few different pages. I think it might be 35. The summary in the annual report obviously compares to the approved annual budgets. Our quarterly reporting shows variances of what's changed throughout the year, particularly in the capital new space. I think there was about an additional 16 million added to that throughout the year. Where would we see that reflected in our annual report?
Through the actual performance. So in the annual report, we have to report against adopted budgets through either an LTP or an annual plan or annual budget. We can't put revisions in there. So the way to see the comparison between actual and revised is through the quarterly reports, through published annual reports, the actual performance, and you'll see some where we have overspent the annual budget, and that's due to those revisions and through decisions from the chamber.
Okay, thank you. And so would it be reasonable to include some commentary around that in the annual report for the purpose of someone who might only be looking at the annual report to get a bit of a snapshot of what's happened over the year? Obviously, as elected members, we can look at our quarterly report, but would it be appropriate to perhaps give a bit of an explanation around that?
Yeah, so we have attempted to do that. If we look at the underneath that financial summary on page 136 of the main agenda, looking particularly at the stormwater comment, we've got higher than budget due to a land purchase brought forward from 2024. Now that would have been brought through the chamber and agreed, and that's reflected through the actual numbers.
Okay, but no overall statements about the size. I mean, our capital program went from 96 million to 113 with those variances, and none of, I guess what I'm trying to get at, if someone was only to look at the annual report, do you think this would accurately describe what's happened in the year if we don't give some commentary around perhaps that capital program growing to that extent?
That's very difficult because the revised budget is not showing up anywhere. It only comes through in those actual numbers, and that's where the variance explanations, and that's probably in the main document rather than the summary. It's very hard to fit everything in the summary because it is a summary, and as you know, there's a lot more detail that goes into some of these things. I can't recall the note number off the top of my head around capital. There we go, 36. So if we look at note 36, there's major variances, which is on the separate agenda on page 229 of that agenda. Under property, plant and equipment, we've got a variance explanation that we're higher due to the revaluations of Three Waters assets and roading assets. Also, that is where our capital expenditure shows up in those kinds of things.
Okay.
It's very difficult to get to where you're saying, but I can understand that if you only look at one of these documents and not the quarterly reports, it may seem a bit different.
Okay, thank you. My second question relates to throughout the document where there's two sets of columns. There's one under council and one under group, and there's a little bit of a difference between those numbers. Can you give us a bit of a brief explanation as to what the main differences are?
Yeah, so the council numbers are only council. The group consists of council, Palmerston North Airport Limited and Cedar, and Te Manawa. So the three CCOs get consolidated into the group, and we report on all three.
Thank you. That's helpful. The other question I had relates to the separate cover, the additional item or the additional information of the changes that have been made. On page 8 of that, towards the top, there was a comment that says overall earnings and salaries also increased by 8.5% over the year to March. In year in review, paragraph 1, and that section was going to be deleted. I'm just wondering if that section's going to be deleted because it's not accurate or because it just was decided that that shouldn't be included, for if there's another reason why that was going to be deleted. I think it's on, it's a change to page 5, but it's outlined on page 8 of the attachment under separate cover.
It's looking like that's an incorrect date and therefore not relevant for the reporting period. So it's increased to March 2023, which means it would cover 2 financial years, and the summary is for the 1 financial year from 1 July 22 to 30 June 23.
Okay. So was it chosen to delete it rather than correct it to a year-end amount?
Yes.
Okay. And just the last question was where it's got some graphs, a few places in the document. Oh, sorry, can't find the page now. Oh, page 13 of the document with all the activities. I'm just wondering if those are the operational activities. I'm just wondering if, I should probably find the page. I just wondered if they're gross or net costs, as in, Page 13.
That's page 13 of the big separate
Yeah.
cover. That would be gross operating expenditure costs, so we're only looking at the expenditure side of items there.
Do we have any graphs like that that show the net cost, as in, because some of those might have, like the sporting one, for example, there must be significant income for arena and other places. Like, is there anywhere that it shows the net operating costs in a graph?
Probably not in a graph form, but
Okay.
throughout the document, and each of the activities will show a net position.
Okay. Just in the numbers part?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you, councillor Naylor. Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Just one quick question around page 137. Looking at the city growth, the number of measures is 5, the targets met is 2. Just wondering, are we on track for city growth going forward in this plan to achieve those targets? And going back to the commentary, it doesn't talk about anything in the commentary about whether or not we are on track to meet those targets.
So the number of targets met is based on the financial year that we're reporting on. In regards to moving forward, I may have to throw that question over to our Chief Planning Officer for additional comment about the moving forward progress. For reference, that summary is on page 47 and 48 of the larger separate cover, where it goes into detail around those particular measures.
Through you, Mr. Chair, David Murphy, Chief Planning Officer. So we've talked a number of times in the chamber about the challenges in terms of getting ahead of growth. The council has allocated some additional budget for this financial year, which is allowing us to accelerate those plan changes. There's been good progress made on Akotiri, so that's heading towards a hearing. A number of the other rezoning proposals are imminent, waiting on some final technical reports. The Te Utanganui master plan, so the engagement with the landowners has now initiated. We have public forums planned for the Bunnythorpe community in the coming weeks. There is good progress ahead. That said, there is still significant challenges in this space, particularly in relation to aligning our infrastructure and land use planning and the affordability aspects of that. I suspect that will continue to be a key challenge, particularly through the LTP. We have seen papers again in this chamber recently that highlight the immense challenges associated with funding growth. That said, with the resources we have, it continues to be a key priority for the team.
So how would the public find out that information?
A summary of effectively what I've said appears in the quarterly report regularly. There is we can certainly look at other ways to highlight the growth planning. I anticipate that growth planning will be a key part of the LTP. We're working on a future development strategy at present. There's a steering group established for that. That will be available for public consultation alongside the LTP, and that will allow, I think, for a robust public discussion about the rate at which we're growing, how we're accommodating that growth, where our priorities are. So the intent is that FDS is a key part of the LTP consultation process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, councillor. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few brief questions. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, David, for being here. Firstly, just last week, we learned that our citywide emissions data was different than we thought it was until that report came to us. Is it possible to work those revised numbers back into the summary and full report at this stage?
Funnily enough, that's one of the changes that we've been to and froing of over the last little time. We've had to move that section of wording to an unaudited part of the report on the basis that Audit New Zealand haven't looked over those survey results and therefore can't provide an opinion on whether those results are accurate. In regards to updating those measures based on last week's report, I don't believe that there would be any problems with doing that, given that's in an unaudited section. So we can take that one through and under the resolution for the CE to make changes, run those through.
Thanks. So for my clarity then, and the communities, the numbers will be correct, but they won't be, correct as we understand them, but they won't be audited.
Correct.
Great, thank you. Can I just ask around page 10 of the summary, it's page 111 of our papers, lists a number of consents. Were all those consents, I'll give you a chance to get there, were all of those consents granted?
Sorry, Councillor, I'm struggling to see page 10 of the summary.
Yes.
111 of the agenda.
Yep. In the left-hand column there's a list of 4 or 5 consents. Were all of the, excuse me, were all of those granted?
I'm getting a finger point to our planning manager who's sitting behind to provide a comment for that.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Jeff Baker, Planning Services Manager. Just quickly have a look at the list because unfortunately my internet wasn't working before, so I didn't get a chance to go over it. Short answer to that is about 3 out of 10 have been granted. Most of those in pretty advanced stages. Expect probably in the next 2 to 3 months the rest of the list will be granted. Yeah.
And to ask specifically around the Massey Solar Farm, is that consent still in process, or has that been granted?
No, it's still in process. We're still getting further information on sort of a number of areas on that one.
Thanks. In terms of a member of the public running into this summary, do you think it would be clear to them that some of those were in process and some of those were complete?
I think the reality is they probably need to make a phone call to find out a little bit more information about the detail. Some of these, they can change week to week. The reality is when I put together that wording, things have changed since that time. So it probably needs, a phone call or an email into the team to get the latest position on them.
Thanks. So just in terms of thinking about the opportunity to finalize any wording in this space, will you be taking a fresh look at that?
Certainly can do, but as I say, even whatever the day that fresh wording is, it'll become outdated from that day onwards, yeah.
Thank you for that response, Jeff. 2 further questions. One's just around what, if any, considerations given to inclusion of community survey results in annual reports and or their summaries?
I've just parked that question for 30 seconds. I just want to be clear about the wording there. I think we need to be careful that these are as at 30th of June. So if we have new information, as Jeff alluded to, how they frequently change, we just need to be very, very careful about including new wording, given it's a as at 30 June report. So I think we just have to, we'll work with Jeff on if there is any correction to that wording that's needed, but we just need to be careful about that.
Absolutely.
Regarding the community surveys, that is one of the changes to the accounting standard that Debbie spoke about a little bit earlier. There is a judgment page, and that is on page 32 of the larger separate agenda. Where we talk about how we use those surveys and the judgments that we use feeding into those KPIs. We do use them, and we identify the margin of error around the surveys and those use. Does that answer the question enough?
It's helpful, yeah. So in terms of the summary document, then to my read of the summary document, we didn't really pull any community survey information forward into that. Would that be fair?
It's inherent in the number of targets that are met. Again, the summary document is a summary document, so we can't put everything that's fed into that. So throughout the key performance indicators is inherent the assumption around the community surveys. It's hard to put the page of judgments in there because then we start ending up with a really big summary, and it kind of defeats the purpose. But it's inherent through the number of measures that have been met and the performance of those.
Thanks. So just to be clear, then that's a staff call in terms of kind of size of the summary that's appropriate.
Yes, as well as the legislative requirements of what we have to have in that document.
Great, thank you. Finally, a question probably for you, Debbie. There's been a bit of chatter at times about the costs associated with audit, and just wondered if you've had any concerns expressed to you about costs and what is being done, if anything, by way of response to those concerns.
Sure. Yes, very much aware of the concerns around the costs of audit. And a bit of history, I suppose, is that that fees have been constrained for probably the last 10 years under various global financial crisis and COVID. And so the cost of doing the audit has actually increased, and there are a number of requirements that have also come onto auditors, as well as the standards. And we got to a position where we can't subsidise those costs anymore. So that's why it's been a bit of a big increase in this round, but very much aware of the concerns around that. What we do though is we're always looking for efficiencies, and we will share any savings that we would get. Historically, audits have been running way over. There's been quite a big difference between the fees that we've had and what we've been able to recover. So we're in a bit of a catch-up mode, but likewise, we are not there to make a profit. We're there to cover our costs. So if there is anything that we could save, we would definitely be sharing that.
Thank you. So in terms of that search for efficiencies, is that complete or ongoing?
It is ongoing. We do have a new audit service tool that's about to be rolled out. In the first year of that rolling out, there will be inefficiencies because it's a new way of setting things up. But going forward, it's going to be a lot more efficient. This is in terms of the way that we work and in our flows. So that's one thing that's coming. For your audit, that will be 2025 that gets rolled out.
Thank you. And just so we can understand a bit better in terms of how costs are apportioned to local councils, is that on a per capita basis, or is it how many hours you actually have to put into work?
Hours. So we have quite a detailed budget against the areas of risk that council's got, and then the time that it will take to work through. So if you do a comparison on a per capita basis, it doesn't necessarily line up because each council has its own issues or own risks that it has to deal with. There is an overall sort of base level that we have to do regardless of the size of the council. So I suppose the more smaller a council, the higher cost per capita, effectively. But yeah, but there is a moderation process through the Office of the Auditor General. So while I'm sitting here and I'm doing my costs, there's quite a process around the look at what I'm putting up for reasonableness. There's a level at, say, Audit New Zealand overall, looking to say, well, how come you're saying this when everyone else is saying that? And then that all goes up to the Office of the Auditor General, and they do a very thorough look, and they look not just at Audit New Zealand, but all the other audit service providers, and just to ensure that there's no outliers, and that the costs that are coming up are reasonable. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Mr. Chair.
Councillor. We have no further questions. The paper sets out a series of recommendations to the Risk and Assurance Committee and also recommendations to Council from this committee, which are set out on the screens in front of us. So I'll open it up to commentary. Oh, could I have I'll move those, and thank you, Councillor Naylor. Now we will open up to any comments, any further commentary. I've no one on. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Thank you for the work to officers on what is a really comprehensive document summarising what's happened in the last year. I think in terms of my read of the document, you know, there's a lot of information in there. I guess when I had a read of it, I look to find what the overall picture is, and I did find it a little bit challenging because we've followed through the year in the quarterly reports, which has given us really clear information. There were some differences when I read this, and that's been explained in terms of the need for it to be compared back to the original approved budget a year ago. That does throw up some anomalies as compared to how we've tracked the year, and particularly I guess what I'm talking about here is the changes that were made to the capital program, that additional 16 million. If I was to just pick this document up, I don't think it would tell me the story of actually what's happened in the last year in regards to the capital new space, other than there has been a significant lift in delivery, and credit to the staff and officers who've really worked hard to make that happen. In terms of the increase in debt, it shows clearly that the increase in net debt is 22 million, which is quite a bit lower than the budget increase of 54 million. So that 32 million gap does highlight perhaps the 31.7 million capital program that wasn't delivered, but I don't see that story told in the commentary in the annual report. Yes, I think if someone really wants to understand that, they need to go back and have a look at the quarterly report to really get that clear picture. So whilst I accept that it ticks all the boxes for being appropriate in terms of the accounting standards, for me personally, I don't think the commentary that's included really tells the story of the changes perhaps that have been made in terms of the variances in a sort of broad sense over the course of the year. Yes, they're obviously included in all the fine detail, but that's my only comment really as a document, and I guess it depends what the purpose of this document is, and I don't know how many people would actually pick it up to try and get an understanding of what's been happening, but I would have assumed that that's what we were trying to achieve by having an annual report. So my view would be that if we're going to have a summary report, that it would be advantageous to have a little bit of the changes that have occurred in that last 12 months in terms of the variances, particularly around the capital program, just to paint that fuller picture. But aside from that, I think it reflects a very busy year of a lot of activity, and I'm sure our council staff will relate to that.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor. The Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. And look, my thanks to the CE and the staff and the auditor. Congratulations on when we started this process, it was a bit lumpy. So to get to this end in a relatively positive manner, I think hats off to you. So thank you to everybody that's contributed to that. And look, I think in 30 years of business, one thing that it's taught me is the importance of the audit, and it is a point in time. So to my colleague next to me, it is a point in time, and I don't disagree with some of your comments, but it is, as Scott said, it's dated, and that's why some of the questions and the comments have come afterwards. So Look, we've done really well in what's been a pretty tough year, really, or challenging circumstances. The business as usual of the organisation has been difficult. The inner ring road at Ferguson Street, I mean, we've completed that, but that was a difficult project. There's been a number of different earthquake strengthening projects as well. In the environmental space, we've done well. Some really good targets have been met there, but there's still quite a bit to do. Active and public transport, probably a little bit, it's dominated us of recent times, but we've made some quite good strides in active and public transport. Featherston Street, the new infrastructure for the city's new bus service. And I think the City Council's performance probably mirrors the city's economy too. We're diverse, and we're seeing that across the work that we do as well. And I think coming back to the economics of it, there's strong growth in the city, and over the last 5 years we've outstripped the national economy. 20.5% of GDP growth compared to 14.4% nationally, and I think that's been great. But there's still some turbulence, and I think I've said this a few times, but I think the city's pretty well placed to face those in the coming years. I just want to comment on the goals, and I think the importance of having a city vision and matching goals. He iti rā, he iti panamu, small city benefits, big city ambition, and having those associated goals, and we've seeing this played out in the following pages. I think although it's historical when we're looking back, I think it helps us shape where we want to go in the future, and I would just say to my colleagues, remember that when we have our LTP discussions. I think some of the questions that came out, and I sort of support Councillor Johnson and even Councillor Barrett on some of the comments there. Maybe there can be some minor amendments to consents and process rather than completed, and I knew exactly where you were going with that, Councillor. And the same with Councillor Johnson. We've done some great work and we've achieved some great targets in Goal 3, which I think is our social glue, the connected and safe community. But where's social housing? Where's civil defence safety? Where's the ongoing commitment to community funding? Not taking away from those key achievements that perhaps officers looked at, but maybe there needs to be a little bit more. And you could say the same for emissions targets, the wastewater consent around Eco-City as well. But look, all in all, I just finally, just on the revenue side, we're 15 million up on what we budgeted, which is quite significant really. And the organisation now turns over, in terms of revenue, 180 million plus a year, and that's quite significant. But it does signal that we're so reliant on targeted rates and rates. 3/4 of our income comes from that. So we do need to, no matter how small, look at what other councils have done, perhaps how we can increase some other revenue streams, just to protect and lessen the load on the ratepayer. Overall, looked at the targets to have 52 out of 64 achieved. This is somewhat academic, but I think it gives a pass mark for the council. Still a bit of work, and again, I stress we do need to keep an eye on these goals and targets because we have missed a few, especially on the economic side, and we've got to keep our eye on the ball. But thanks to everybody again and be involved. It's actually been a pretty good year in a challenging environment. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Chair, and yes, agree with majority of the Mayor's comments. Just to explain my questions around the little box takeouts of what we've achieved. We all know that when people look at a report, it's only certain people that will read the detail. And what people see are the headlines. So I think it's really important that we get the headlines right. And when I think about, the projects and the outcomes that people in the community are interested in terms of community, I know it's going to be things like the social housing. I know it's going to be something like how much funding are we providing. We've got the amount of funding that we provide to environmental groups under Goal 4, but not in community. And, that's a significant amount every year. I think something to be proud of, actually, and something we should be headlining. The same in environment. When you look at environment, no mention of emissions. Climate change is, a key concern of many people in the city. And I think it'd be good to have in the headline what we've achieved in that area. Take on board that these are minor amendments. They might be minor amendments, but I don't think they're minor in the scheme of things in terms of, I think as Councillor Naylor used the phrase, telling the story of what has been achieved for the community. We need to focus on those areas that we know are key goals of ours, that are also key goals for the community for us to achieve. So I will be sending some suggestions forward, and other chairs of different committees might like to review the headlines that are there for their committees and see if they think that fairly and accurately reflects the key achievements that have been achieved over the last year. Because as the Mayor said, it's actually been a really good year under very trying circumstances. And so I think, congratulations to the CE and all of the staff who've managed to produce such a good result. I think it's very heartening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Zavalin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is tautoko, what Councillor Johnson has just said. That was one of the points I'd wanted to raise as well, as in the nature of an achievement or a key achievement. And some of these I feel are more reflective of ongoing work or future things that are coming to our way, as opposed to something that we've achieved or made good progress in this financial year, which, as Scott pointed out, is the sort of date parameters that we're working in. So I'm full support, and I might have a couple of suggestions to send as well. And I just wanted to raise a couple of other points where there are a number of places in the reports that are actually reflective of the 21-22 year, and those are mostly found in relation to the CCO, cultural CCOs, Te Manawa, the Globe, the Regent, but also in our city and organisational-wide emissions sections. And so I just want to, I guess, I'd feed those particular points through as minor amendments, but as Councillor Johnson pointed out, they're not minor in the scheme of things if we are presenting information from a different financial year. So I think it is important to pick those up, and I'm glad there's an opportunity to do that. Those are really presenting a COVID picture rather than a recovery picture, which I think is what we've heard from those organisations as they've come to us throughout this year, and that will be reflected in their annual reports as well. And the only other point there, I think, is the framing of the section relating to the airport. There's not a single mention of the earthquake strengthening there, which is the predominant driver of that capital investment that's required, and the focus there. I would question where we're coming from in framing that, so I'll feed that through in minor amendments as well. But I just wanted to say it was a phenomenal amount of reading, and that really means an extra phenomenal amount of writing and analysis and pulling together, so just snaps to you. Thank you all so much. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harpeta.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I agree with all the comments that have been said already. My comments refer to page 110, which is to do with the housing section. The Chief Planning Officer talked about a planning framework, and I just wondered if it could be referenced in this section, because I think if you were a developer, you'd be looking for some kind of reference in that area. So I just think talking about different areas of the city that are going to be developed in the future, but having the planning framework in there as well, I think would be quite a good way of tying it all together as well. So really good document. Thank you very much for all the work that's been done, but I just think if we could tie some kind of planning framework in there as well, even if it was linked in. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I'd also like to add my congratulations to both the audit and management team on getting us to where we are, and reflecting on the discussion. I think there's been some excellent feedback for you, Wade, and I guess you'll collect that on the way through. My observation is that at a governance level, you're absolutely dependent on there being an open engagement between the audit team and the management team, and I certainly got that sense today, so thank you for that. And I think it's an excellent achievement to have got through this process with absolutely nothing on the unadjusted items list, so well done. So I think with that, we could now move to vote on the recommendations in front of us. Carried unanimously, thank you. So thank you very much, team. And we will now move back to the agenda and we'll go to our Business Assurance 6-monthly accountability report and welcome Ms Suma to the chair.
Morning, everyone. So this is basically an update on every review that we've completed to date and presented to you. We, this time round, did actually work with every single review, well, the manager that's responsible for the review, and talk through every single action just to see that it was still relevant and that work was still underway, or maybe did we need to take a different approach to something. So I think in general, there's actually been quite a bit of progress. You know, we've completed 14%, which seems like a small percentage, but it's quite a lot of work. And a lot of that goes to health and safety. I was personally quite impressed with the amount of work that's been done in that space. A lot of policies, processes have been put in place and put on the intranet for staff to access. So when I was shadowing the auditor, when they did that about a year or two ago maybe, it's a massive improvement in maturity in that space. I think there's still work to be done, there always is in that space, but that's something I did want to highlight. A focus area, I guess, for the next 6 months is in our, well, in my perspective, around the IT disaster recovery space, because the organisation is going through quite a lot of system changes, digital changes, and, you know, most of those might actually make us, might put us in a more reliable and safer space, but it's just a matter of working through that and ensuring that's where we are heading and putting it on paper. Otherwise, managers have provided some commentary on progress under each review, but if there are any questions, happy to take them through you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Ms Suma. We'll throw it open for questions. Councillors? Councillor Naylor.
Thanks. Just a quick question, really. Do you think 180 reviews is too many to be trying to manage at once? It does seem like a massive number. A lot of them are already complete, to be fair, and what we are also progressing towards is grouping some of these up together, because there might be like 5 different ones that relate to the same thing. So when we actually chase them, it's not a big effort, as it may seem from the numbers. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barrett?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thanks, Ms Suma. Somewhat along the same lines, you said in terms of the process that you've been through to bring us this report, you'd had a conversation with the managers responsible in each area. And you indicated one of the aspects of that conversation was whether the actions were still relevant. Were there any identified that were not?
There's a lot of actions there, so I probably need to go back and check how many of those there may have been. One that comes to mind is the one where we've asked to accept the risk. So, of course, in that situation, it would seem like duplicate effort to some extent. So that's where we did make that decision to change it. That's probably the only one from the top of my mind that I can think of.
No, that's thanks. Just trying to understand the overall trend there, and I think that's clear. In terms of completion, can you give us some insight into what that actually means and what process is there around closing things out?
Yes, of course. So basically, with every review, we send to managers a list of outstanding items, and they will come back to us with a status update at first. So whether it's not started, whether it's in progress, or whether they think it's completed. Where it comes back to us with completed, we will then go back to them and ask for validation of that in some way or form, depending on what the action is, of course. And we do validate that it's done. In some instances, we will then move that into our spot checking areas for the future, so that it's not just done and dusted, it's monitoring as well to some extent.
Great, thank you. And in terms of that, I guess, monitoring of overall effect, I mean, the reason we have presumably 180 actions is we want to see some things, you know, substantially improve over time. Is there kind of a level of monitoring that goes beyond just the did you complete the action and through to kind of an efficacy assessment to understand are we actually having the sorts of impacts that we're hoping to?
It depends on the finding, to be fair, and the nature of it. If we do and we don't, and dependent on different tasks and items that are on the list. So, for instance, if we've asked that, for let me just think of an example quickly.
Yeah, that's fine. Take your time.
For instance, authority altitude, right? One of the findings that audit have continuously raised is around our one-up approval and how we don't have it. But now that we know that the system doesn't allow it to go sideways, it only forces upwards approvals, that addresses the risk. So from a spot check point of view, we would check that, of course, you know, from time to time randomly have the right people approved it in the reporting line. But from the system point of view, we're pretty comfortable that the system's not going to allow it. And if it does, it's probably an exception to the rule, not something that we would expect to happen normally.
Great, thank you. And finally, the asset management maturity assessment seemed to be a bit of an anomaly to me, in that it didn't have assigned owners for each of those tasks. At least in the list that we presented with, I assume there are assigned owners for those tasks.
So my understanding, and unfortunately Helen's one of the only managers that couldn't make it today, she's at a conference, but my understanding is that she is working through that. She was just uncomfortable giving responsibility to another manager until she's had a good conversation with them around what's expected and what she wants delivered. So that's, I believe, underway, but that's probably why in our report we haven't got those responsibilities allocated yet.
Thanks. So is the date at the top of that correct then, August 2022, that it was presented?
Yes, should be correct. That's when it was presented.
And so can we take from that that it's been a bit over a year and there's still an effort being made to assign actions to individuals?
That's correct.
Thank you. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Zavalin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ms. Emma. I'm also in the asset management area, but particularly I know Helen's not here, but I noted in the asset planning manager comment, there was a talk there that progress has been steady because some of these have been able to be wrapped up in the long-term plan prep process. And, excuse me, and that it also mentions specifically that year one of the long-term plan would be the ideal time to make further progress on that. I'm curious, is that something that is specific to asset management planning as an approach in that division, or is that an approach that other divisions have been able to take, or is it just sort of characteristic of asset management planning that you could take a 3-year planning approach for something like this?
I will definitely ask Helen to respond to that question, but if I could give you my perspective on it, I think it is a bit more specific to their division, and that's because their focus at different times of the LTP years is different. So whilst in 1 year their focus is delivering the LTP, another couple of years might be improvement.
Excellent, that's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to, excuse me, talk about the develop a health and safety framework, mammoth task. Just wanted to understand what that looked like, because it's a big task.
I might ask Selwyn to.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair, Councillor. So the framework looks like a safe management system made up of, you might refer to it as a health and safety manual. So we first developed a health and safety manual way back in 2016, and unfortunately we didn't invest into the future development of the manual. So what we've developed is a safe management system that is not going to sit on the shelf and gather dust, but it has policies, procedures, key safety requirements that will be user-friendly to our team, and it's just going to make our place a lot safer.
So how will it be implemented across departments, across the organisation?
So at the moment, it's under peer review, and so I'm going to work with my manager on the best way forward to get it into Palmerston North as part of our culture.
Okay. Again, how will it be implemented? How will people use it?
Oh, so it'll be, so we have our own SharePoint. So it'll be, we're going to go away from the big thick manuals and it'll be available via our SharePoint. So I'll work with our marketing team on how we can develop that and make it accessible to our staff. So we'll put out a bit of a program, first launch it with our leaders and then launch it across PNCC.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, councillor. Thank you, Selwyn. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms Uma. Can I just, on page 22, when we're talking about the financial delegation review, and it's looking like it's all in progress with current dates there, but can I just parallel to what's intended with your work schedule on page 150? There's a delegations manual review of the financial delegations and associated definition section. I'm just trying to parallel why that's prompted again in the work schedule around the review of financial delegations.
I'll pass that to Hannah. She owns it, but one is reviewing, asking it for it to be done, and the other, I think, is the outcome coming to you.
That's the answer? Yeah.
Through you, Mr Chair, yes, correct from Ms Uma. So it's in your work schedule because in order for the financial delegations, if there was any change from that review, it would need to be agreed by council. Thus, it's in the council's work schedule that it's expected that work to come back to the chamber.
All right, thank you. Just on the following page, around the asset management maturity assessment, I'm just looking at the initial agreed dates and that just raising the concern that some of them go out to June 25 and December 26 down that list in that first column. Can you just give, is that just a capacity issue, and yet they've noted being in progress? Is that just the reporting back of the outcome? Can I just understand where we're at and what those dates are flagging?
Again, I'm really sorry, but that's something I'm going to have to ask Helen to come back to you on specifically. I know that when we were discussing the due dates, we do normally let management to some extent decide what those dates are that they can work towards, given their workload and given their priorities. A lot of the work in this section, my understanding is, were big pieces of work, and then we're reliant to some extent on the LTP as well. So that's played a part in when she determined what the appropriate timeframes were.
Okay, so would it be fair to say that
Excuse me, councillor. Bryce, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, I can provide some comment on that. So yes, a lot of the progress is capacity driven. It's also budget driven in some cases as well. So, for instance, in the current financial year, some of the asset management improvement plan budgets were cut in half, for instance. So therefore, that slows some of the natural progress we're able to proceed with as well. So some of the comment around being part of the LTP is where we're able to actually put forward some programs to start actually getting through some of these items and driving them that council can then consider as part of that process.
Thank you. Can I supplementary to that? Just in regards to under the maybe last more than 6 or 7 years, or at least 5 or 6, we've had a focus on asset management and doing these maturity plans, and yet it seems like there's still quite a list, and some of them looks like they haven't started. Is there an opportunity for us to give some sort of input into the priorities around that list equally? And I guess I'm just concerned we're going into a long-term plan and we still haven't got updated data, supposedly, to actually inform our decision-making around the state of our monitoring on the asset management, which is huge.
I think absolutely you could, and that's something I'll have a chat to Helen about.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, councillor. Just a question from me, Ms Uma. You made comment on a focus going forward on IT and business recovery. I had a specific question around risks to the organisation in relation to denial of service, attacks and breaches of privacy and use of confidential data held by the organisation. What's the plan? What's the assessment of our state of readiness in that regard?
I might ask our Head of Digital Solutions, Ryan, to come and help with that.
Welcome.
Through the chair, good morning. My name is Ryan, Head of Digital Solutions. So the question regard to DDoS specifically. So we have a comprehensive cybersecurity uplift program as sort of the first phase of the digital transformation program. And so that addresses a lot of those threats. And so DDoS actually is probably not one of the highest risk vectors at this point. And so without going into too much detail, we do have mitigation strategies in order to move our systems to a different start if there is a denial of service. With regard to data privacy and data quality, really the second phase of digital transformation is helping us to move to more sustainable data platforms. Will help us to not only enrich the quality of the data to make sure we trust it better, but we also putting in much more modern systems to do the analytics so we can get faster decisions. And so through that process, we focus on looking all of the roles in the organizations to make sure that people have the right access to the right information and they're not seeing the wrong things. And also we're moving from legacy systems, some of the data, for example, Oasis, we'll move into a new system called ServiceNow, which will help us to protect that data.
Thank you, Ryan. So just in relation to that, and I'm pleased to hear that we are very conscious of it and working diligently at it, how are you planning to check or confirm your belief that we're in good shape?
So there's a couple of ways. So we follow a program called the NIST framework, which is a big cybersecurity standard. So we help to make sure we meet those areas. And we put a bunch of different controls in place, and we regularly test it. We have a strong security partner that's global that runs us through various different assessments. And I guess when it comes to cyber attacks, the next phase really is to make sure that we've run through some simulations of that. And that to me would be a good watermark to where we're operationally ready. And so that's sort of the few controls we'll put in place. There's lots more detail on that if you want that.
Thank you. Thank you for that background, Ryan. There are no further questions. So we have the recommendation in front of us on the screen, and I'd like to move that recommendation. I see Councillor Barrett. And so we'll throw it open to commentary. Mayor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Masuma and Selwyn and others that have put together the report. I've just noted, and other councillors will have as well, just the increase on antisocial behaviour towards council staff. I was reading the latest local government magazine, and there was commentary from councils from north to south about measures they've had to take. And I would have thought that we perhaps were not in that space, but it seems we are. And I'm just looking at these members of the public critical issues and risks to our staff. Now, sorry?
I think, Mayor, we're going to get to those reports and the well-being.
I'm on a different one?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
Right. Councillor Dennison, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just was going to make some comments around the asset management maturity, just as a drilling down on this, around some of the initial dates that have been agreed and no current agreed date, and yet indicating that they're in progress. I'm not sure if I'm understanding that correctly or not, but I just want to raise that for some attention, because the asset management plans are key to understanding the state of our assets and informing our long-term plan budgets. So we've got some honest and scaled budgets to fit in. So I just really wanted to add a comment to that. Thank you, to highlight it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like Councillor Dennison, just wanted to underscore the absolute criticality of the asset management function overall and this maturity assessment. It was concerning for me to hear that, you know, we're 15 months on now from this having been presented to us, and if I'm to understand the response correctly, still in the process of actually assigning 26 actions to, you know, responsible members of a team. It's concerning to me that, you know, progress there may be lagging, and it's just really hard to actually judge on the basis of this report. So I'm hopeful that we are moving strongly in that space. I'm all too aware of communities that are suffering in this country from the failure of asset management, and we need to be right on top of this space, and would encourage everyone involved and near it to do everything they can to actually get this moving forward. Thank you.
Councillor Harpeter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank Ms. Suma and her team for all the work that has been done to date in this area. I think it's been a big effort that's been done to date, and the schedule that has been put in front of us has been outstanding. So thank you for all the work that you've done to date. It's really, really appreciated from us as councillors, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The waiting list is empty, so I think we can now move to vote on the recommendation in front of us. And that has been carried unanimously. Thank you. So we will now move, thank you, Ms. Suma. We will now move to item 8 on the agenda and deal with the risk management update from Stephen and Jason. So we're in your good hands.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, councillors. Thanks for the opportunity to be able to share a progress update as to where we've so far come with the risk management council operationally. I'll take the paper as read. It does outline some progress that we've made in an operational space and some next steps for us to go forward into enterprise risk and further reporting through to councillors to give you oversight of risk management for council. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jason. I'll throw it open to questions. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report. Just have a question about the risk appetite matrix on page 57. So I recall we had a workshop on this, and some of us expressed some views around our appetite for risk not being quite as adventurous as what is represented in the matrix there. Has there been any adjustment to that table since the workshop, or is that as presented?
I'll go first. Through the chair, there'll be another further report from that workshop that'll be looking to come back to the next Risk and Assurance Committee to have elected members have a closer look at your risk appetite and have a discussion about it in here.
Okay, so the risk appetite that is portrayed in that table there, if we're agreeing to this, receiving this policy and framework, are we endorsing that level of risk appetite?
Through the chair, is there any conversations that you have about adjusting your risk appetite in future meetings will then be adjusted in this paper you have in front of you?
But this is the starting point.
Correct.
Okay, so if we were uncomfortable with this as a starting point, what's the suggested action at this point in time?
At the moment, you're just receiving the report, the risk management framework, and the policy that you have in front of you are internal administrative policies and frameworks that we have in place around risk management currently at the moment. If there are some adjustments to be made, we'll make those adjustments as you make your decision at the next meeting. So at the moment, it's this is what the organisation is potentially working towards. But if there's some adjustments to be made in future, we'll make those in due course.
So there's a report coming to
That's
determine that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and building on that line of questioning, in terms of the information coming in that report, could we get some comment on what level of analysis will be provided around adjustments to risk appetite and what sort of information we'll have as a basis for decision making there?
Stephen Minton, Risk Management Advisor. So the intent is to have a further expansion and explanation around risk tolerance and risk appetite, and then against each of the risk categories, the consequences of changing the risk tolerance both up and down. I mean, obviously for health and safety we can't take it down any further, but there'll be analysis against all of the risk categories and what that would mean for council and the city if we were to change our risk tolerance.
Thanks, that's really encouraging to hear. Will that analysis also consider the possibility of narrowing the risk appetite? And I noticed that in one case we only have 2 bands highlighted, and the others we have 3 bands highlighted.
Yeah, so it may, but I mean the focus we should really focus on is around risk tolerance, because at the end of the day that's the ultimate speed limit that we want to go to. There may be changes in the risk appetite. That wouldn't necessarily change how we deal with risk unless we change the risk tolerance though.
Great, thank you, that's encouraging to hear. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. There are no further questions, so we have a recommendation in front of us on the screens. I'd like to move that and have a seconder, Councillor Naylor. And now we will take any commentary or observations, of which there are some coming. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and at risk of sounding like a broken record, but wanting to be very clear on this on an ongoing basis, when I think about risk appetite around legal compliance, when I think about risk appetite around environmental, when I think about risk appetite around reputation, and when I think about risk appetite around cultural, I do not have neutral feelings on those. And it needs to be very clear here and now that while there's yet a paper to come that will help us actually ascertain that, I have zero comfort with being in the neutral space on those. I'm very much in the adverse, and I will look forward to the opportunity to address that in an upcoming meeting.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Zavalin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tau toko that, Councillor Barrett. Likewise, I don't have neutral feelings about medium tolerance levels, particularly around environmental. I think in a workshop we teased out that health, safety and wellbeing, which is the only one we have a low risk setting for, a low risk tolerance setting for, does not relate to any living creature that's not a human, and we have an animal shelter. So I think it's a gross double standard that we have animals in our care and then we have a medium risk setting for how they feel while they're in our care. I'm not neutral about that, particularly environment. A lot of our economic and agricultural industries around here actually rely on productive soils and they rely on a quality, stable environment, and to have a medium risk sitting there, I think puts all of that in shaky ground. So likewise, we'll be talking about that further when it comes back around to us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. The Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't going to comment, but my colleagues have, so I will. We have, rightly so, we have a very risk-adverse and very cautious settings at the moment. Just to come back and maybe put another view on things, what is wrong? What are we trying to fix? I'll give you an example. If you want to take down reputational risk, we'll be off social media. We will stop doing things. That is the risk you run at changing some of these settings. And the councillors know that. So we've just got to be a bit careful. What are we trying to fix? I really do say that seriously. Absolutely, we should have some low setting for health and safety, and I wrongly got the wrong paper before, so I won't repeat that commentary. But there are some things which, you know, if we do not have a medium setting around financial, we'll be broke within a couple of years because we just won't raise any money externally because the risk will be too great. So I just push back at some of my colleagues. What are we trying to fix? Unless there's a political agenda. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Wood.
Oh, did you say me? Thank you. Just briefly to say, thank you for the report, and I'm really comfortable with this as a framework, and I think what's in front of us is a better model or a more mature model for us to work within going forward, and whilst there might be further conversations to have about where the settings might sit, I'm really comfortable with this as an overall framework. So happy to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also, just to back up what the Mayor said, this isn't about feelings that we feel neutral on something. This is about the risk of something occurring. And so if you are neutral on financial risk, it is not saying that we feel fine if a financial mistake happens. It's about accepting that to make things happen in a timely manner, we have to accept some level of risk. It's not saying if a reputational risk occurs that I'll sit there and go, oh, well, I feel neutral about that. I will still feel upset if a reputational risk does eventuate, but it accepts the reality that we need to make decisions in a timely manner. We can't overcook everything to a point that we avoid any risk at all. So I just have to push back against the argument that, you know, because it's set in the neutral space, that we would feel neutral about that outcome actually occurring. That is not what this is suggesting. But it does mean that there is a balance to be struck between how we feel about a result and the risks that we have to take to achieve something in a timely manner. I'm very comfortable with where this is set at. Council's a very risk-averse organisation. We deal with public money, and so I think that's sensible. None of these categories we're seeking actively risk in, as a more active or a quicker moving organisation may do, and I respect why it's been set at the level it's been set at. But yeah, this is not about wanting risk to happen, it's about accepting that possibility. Let's take, when we resealed the end of James Line, for example, the reputational risk being set somewhere between 2 and 4. Well, after we finished sealing James Line, we actually had to dig a bit of it up because there was a pipe that broke just after we'd resealed it. Now, if we wanted to have, and that is a reputational risk because we've just resealed a road, now we've had to dig a little bit of it back up and do it again. Well, to avoid that reputational risk entirely, we would have to do a full system review of the pipes in that area. We'd have to put cameras down them to make sure that there was no potential damage that would occur in the future. We'd have to go through a massive full network analysis to be able to do a simple piece of infrastructure upgrade to avoid any reputational risk. Well, we're not going to do that. Well, we can do that if we want, but as the Mayor says, it will cost us an exceptional amount of money and it will slow us down majorly. So I'm comfortable with where the risk's at. I don't think anything in here is saying that we want these risks to happen or that we're being reckless or seeking risks to happen. Everything's set from averse to neutral. So I just really encourage councillors, we need to have some risk appetite to make things happen.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Sorry, colleagues have provoked me into a response now. I really think that the dire warnings that have been sounded by the Mayor and Councillor Wood really are the sorts of things, those are the kind of the facts that we're looking for in the report to come forward. So the whole point of having a report come forward to talk about the consequences of moving a risk analysis up or down is what we're waiting for to change the risk analysis. So whilst colleagues may have their own opinions about what changing a risk analysis will do or won't do or what it will cost us or what might be involved, I personally would rather wait for the report. And it's on the basis of the report that I'll be making a decision about whether or not I want to change risk appetite, which is why I asked the questions in the first place. So I think it might be a little over-egging the pudding to be describing, what might be involved to change a risk appetite on reputational. So just think we should have a little bit more tempered approach here until the report comes back, then we can make an informed decision. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Reflecting on this discussion, the couple of things. Firstly, I think it's great that there are divergent views around the table. I also think it's fabulous that there is and has been over a period of time a concerted degree of emphasis and focus by the management team in terms of developing a framework and in terms of identifying, building operational risk. To make the debate that we're having now meaningful, we need to wait to the next step, and the challenge in this will be to identify the material, important, strategic, enterprise-wide risks, be clear around how we define consequence, be clear in terms of what our mitigation strategies are, and form a view at the end of the application of those mitigation strategies. Are we comfortable or are we not with the level of risk that is left and is residual for the organisation? So I'm really, in a sense, pleased to hear divergent views around the table. I think that's extremely positive. I'm pleased that there is a lot of work and there is a framework and there are definitions, and we are working towards pulling it together so that at a governance level we can have a good, measured debate to make sure that we've got a level of comfort around residual risk in the organisation. So I support the recommendation. So I think we can put this recommendation to the vote. And that is carried unanimously. And it seems that this would be a very good time to break for morning tea. We are a little behind on our run sheet, so I'd encourage members that we'll keep it very sharp, 15 minutes back in the chamber. Thank you. Okay, thank you, everyone. We're all back, I hope. So we will now move to item 10 on our agenda, which is the Wellbeing Quarterly Report, with Connie and Wayne to present that. So in your safe hands, thank you.
Tēnā koutou. I thank you for the opportunity, and I just wanted to say that from my perspective, I accept that the report has been read, and if there's any questions, I would welcome those.
Thank you. Thank you, Connie. So we'll throw it open for questions, councillors. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Connie. Thanks, Wayne. Just a couple of questions. You indicated in the report, Connie, that the arrangement with Vitae has been ended or suspended. Just wondered if that's created a gap in any way and if that gap is being filled.
No, I feel fairly confident that there is no gap at this stage. Where the service is still utilised, like in the front of house and in the contact centre, we still offer those opportunities, and we still have maintained it. But it is more targeted at the areas where people don't feel comfortable making use of the service. So it is in response to requests from our people, and we are very confident that there's a lot of communications out there for people that are able to access individual counselling sessions, and what is the contact numbers to access those.
Great,
So.
thank you for that. My other question is just kind of an overall question, but would you say that overall our well-being offering as a council is a competitive advantage for us in recruitment?
I do feel like our wellbeing offerings is in a good space, but and I do feel like the research tells us that if you have good wellbeing offerings, that it is a attraction and a retention factor. It would improve those spaces. Do we have more work to do? Yes. I do feel there's more to do to improve our wellbeing offerings. But at the moment, we have a really good and solid baseline or building blocks that we can build the rest of our initiatives and offerings on.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just looking at your recruitment, advertised 44, filled 24, still active 20. Any tricks and things that you're doing to try and attract people to roles here at the council?
Yeah, I think just a general comment first. I said at the last meeting that recruitment was becoming slightly easier, the market as a whole, and that's been proven. We're getting more applicants and we're getting more successful ones. We've got a philosophy that no hire is better than a bad hire, so to have all 24 roles completed and filled was unusual, but it's a great result. As Connie said, we are working on our EV, employee value proposition, about how that attracts people, and that's where we're putting that effort in the future. That's what we're moving towards, to try and make us even more attractive than we are currently. But I think overall things are looking quite good at the moment.
Second question, if I may, Mr. Chair, is about turnover. 119 number. I'm on page 146.
Yep.
It's quite steady compared to 123 the year before. Have you got a comment on that, Wayne?
Yeah, turnover is reducing slightly, and it is going in the right direction, whereas previously it was going in the wrong direction. So our turnover is reducing, and hopefully that will continue. It is still high, much higher than we would like, but I think that's across New Zealand. Turnover is high.
How does it? Another question: how does it compare to other local governments?
No, it's quite good. The smaller local smaller councils have lower turnover, and councils our size and larger do have higher levels of turnover. I think we've reported in the past that Wellington at that time was having around 30% turnover. We've never reached anything like that, but so yeah, it depends who you compare yourselves to, I suppose, in terms of that turnover. But I think for Palmerston North and for the size of the council, I think that we're reasonably consistent with other same-sized councils.
Well, just that we've heard the infrastructure team has been quite, how do I say the word? They've had some vacancies in that area. So if we did it by department, how would that percentage look in terms of the infrastructure team?
Sorry, I'm not.
You can't. I know.
I don't think infrastructure turnover. Sorry, no, I won't comment on that because I haven't got the figures in front of me.
So if I ask you that,
I could get that to you. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any other department that's is out there?
No.
Just the infrastructure.
I think infrastructure has a number of vacancies that we haven't filled, through that period. But maybe Bryce might have a comment on infrastructure.
Is it because they're technical vacancies, they're hard to fill, or is it because people are just leaving to go to other better jobs?
Oh, everyone. I'll leave it to Bryce first.
Bryce Hosking, Acting Chief Infrastructure Officer. I think it's fair to say there's pockets of vacancies that are proving quite difficult to fill. For instance, in terms of some of the engineering roles are simply quite a limited pool, really, and we're fishing in the same pool as a number of other parties. So they're proving to be long-standing, but we are working on them. There's some other pockets as well, some areas in terms of operations, such as truck drivers for collections and things like that. Again, it's a pretty sticky pool to be trying to get people in. As opposed to a huge constant sort of turnover, it's more some consistent pockets that are causing the tension.
Thank you, Bryce. Thank you, Wayne. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your report. Just want to ask around the sort of prevent harm focus of the wellbeing report. It's a little bit, I guess, thin, I suppose I would say. And I'm wondering what other measures you are using or could use to kind of look at the prevent harm side of things. So, I mean, one thing that occurred to me is workload, for example, but I'd be keen to hear your perspective on whether you think we could do a bit more in the prevent harm area of things.
I have to agree with your observation. That is the space that I feel like needs the most attention. But in order to move well in that space, we need to have the infrastructure underneath it in the other spaces. We need to make sure that our support mechanisms is in place. We need to make sure that our people are well trained and are comfortable in the wellbeing space, having those conversations, understanding the support mechanisms available in the organisation. So the preventing harm bit would be mostly based on initiatives that lives in the Health and Safety and Wellbeing Act, or the Health and Safety Act. And the Health and Safety Act talks about psychosocial risk management, and it actually is based on the same principles that you would apply in the health and safety environment. It's about going through processes that actually assess workplace stressors and the risk, and there's quite a lot of them, workload being one. So at the moment, WorkSafe would refer organisations to the Code of Practices being used in Australia in that space. But in saying that, it would involve a significant investment in terms of finances. So it is a process that we will need to go back to our executive leadership team with, have a proposal compiled, and the intent would not be to move into that space before the next financial year. So that's one of the key projects that I believe is not on the radar this very moment, but with the intent to go into that space next financial year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Excuse me. The other question I had was around the lost days. So the lost days seems to be quite variable, and I wonder if there's presumably a seasonal effect, and if those are just the quarterly figures, would it be more helpful to provide like an annual rolling average or something so that we could, because I initially thought, oh, September's quite high, but then when I looked back to October last year, that was also high. So I'm thinking, could we maybe present those figures so it's easier to determine what's happening with lost days?
Yep, I'll do that for the next report. Also, I'll have a look at the those injuries that are related to work and those that are not related to work. I would like to expand that out a bit further for you to give you a bit more information.
Okay, that would be helpful. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, councillor. So there are no further questions. We have a recommendation in front of the committee to receive the report as on the screens in front of us. Happy to move that. Seconder, councillor Naylor. Thank you. Open to any commentary from councillors. Councillor Johnson.
Just a quick comment to say that, I do feel that the preventing harm is one that we have as a responsibility as an organisation. And looking at the wellbeing report, quite a lot of it seems to focus on actions that the individual might take or be supported with. But I definitely think there's a piece to this picture which is actions that the organisation should or could take to reduce harm and to enhance wellbeing of individuals. So in a way that the Welcoming Communities programme kind of flipped the integration of newcomers into putting the emphasis on the receiving community to make some changes so that it was a better integration experience for individuals. I feel like this report in some senses needs to be flipped so that instead of the emphasis being on the individual to take up a course or to take up counselling or whatever, that the emphasis should be on the organisation as a whole to provide an environment that's more conducive to people's well-being. So just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harpeta.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I like the fact that we are reporting on the wellbeing. I think it's great to see it from a council's perspective, to see all the work that is going on in that area. I think my point that I wanted to raise was around the turnover. I think it needs to be broken down a little bit further so that we can see areas of council that are just a bit more transparent, so we can see which areas we've got more problem areas. So I just think that we need to have a look at that. We hear of the vacancies in infrastructure, but we do need to have a look at what the turnover is in the infrastructure area. So that would be a little bit more information for us going forward. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, councillor. That brings us to the end of commentary, so I'd like to vote on this recommendation now. And that recommendation is carried unanimously, which brings us to the item 11 on our agenda, the committee work schedule, which I think we can take as read and open to questions, if any, of which there are none. I'll open it now to have a recommendation which I'd like to move. And seconder, thank you, Councillor Naylor. And any comments? Of which there are none, so we will move to vote. And that has been passed unanimously. So that brings us now to item 12, which is the exclusion of the public for the reasons on the agenda papers as shown on the screen. And if we can scroll up, So are there any questions? Yep, well, I think, okay. We should note that item 15, there's been a slight change. There is actually only one reason listed on the recommendation for exclusion of the public around the animal shelter review as set out there. We do have some questions, so we'll take Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering if I could see a comment from officers on the exclusion of the public for third-party commercial reasons regarding the assurance report for the animal shelter review, as to why, within reason of what can be said publicly, that's been placed in part 2.
Thank you, Councillor. The report has got some commentary in there, apologies, on a contracting company that we have an established relationship with, and it is considered that we discuss the report in part 2 and that it is redacted as set out in the resolution, which is released but with redactions relating to the third-party commercial commentary.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just on this similar point, in the past where there has been issues or items that have attracted a bit of public interest, Council has expressed the desire to try and include the part of that report that can be put in part 1 and keep the commercial sensitive part into part 2. Was that considered as an option for this paper?
Through the chair, yes, it was, but I think that just given the nature of the report and how it's written and presented, that it was unable to do it, separate it appropriately at this time.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Just a quick question around the health and safety report being in part 2, where it's normally in part 1. Again, within the limitations of being in public now, is someone able to explain what the change is this quarter compared to previously?
Would you like to comment, Wade?
Yes, through the chair, there are some commentary. So we have had a reasonably some lengthy conversations with the chair about this and actually how health and safety is presented in the future, along the lines that Councillor Naylor has just described, as well as actually having some parts that can comfortably sit in the public part of the agenda. There are some commentary in there about health and safety matters directly relating to my staff that I think need to be discussed in there, hence the reason why they're in part 2 at this point in time. So we will consider about how this is presented to this committee in future and whether or not there should be 2 components to some of these reports that have been presented.
So when you say 2 components, do you mean a component that's presented in part 1 and then a component that's presented in part 2?
Yes, and or whether or not there are one report, but there are parts of that one report that are part 2 matters.
Okay. I do have a comment, but I suppose we're in questions, are we, at the moment? Okay.
But I think that is the end of questions. So I'd like to move the resolution as set out and seek a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Harpeta, and then we'll throw to comments, and Councillor Johnson.
Just to say that whilst I understand what the Chief Executive is saying about needing to have some parts in part 2, I think to just put the whole report in part 2 isn't my ideal solution to this, because I think there's a considerable amount of public interest around health and safety at a corporation level, and that we should be publicly accountable for health and safety. So I understand that there's a recommendation for public release afterwards, but I actually think my preference would be going forward, if there are parts that need to be in part 2, and I understand the reasoning for that we still have a part 1 report that can be discussed to some degree, because I think that public accountability is very important.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Along similar lines to Councillor Johnson, but on the other report that's been highlighted, the animal shelter review, I do think when the majority of a report does relate to the decision-making process and a small amount of the report relates to perhaps maybe deemed as commercially sensitive, then it would be preferable to separate out what is of public interest and just keep this commercial sensitivity part in part 2. And I acknowledge the CE's comments about that there will be consideration in trying to do that in the future, and I certainly would welcome that.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for those comments, which we'll take on board. So now like to put this resolution to the vote. Fifteen for and 1 against. Thank you. Just take a break for a couple of minutes while we close down the public feed.